So kia ora koutou, everyone. Ko Megan Toku Ingawa. I sit on the executive committee for the NZILA, and we're going to be hosting 3 speaker series over the next 3 weeks for you guys at university. And to kick things off, we just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into all the different areas and roles that you can find yourself in as a landscape architect. Hopefully it might showcase some areas that you may not even be aware of, or might give you some more information if you're trying to figure out where your interest lies, especially for those that will be entering the profession in the next year or two. When we started writing this list of all the different areas, it became quite apparent there's quite a few. So we've decided to split this segment over two talks. So the first one being today, and then the second one, part B, is next week on Wednesday. So today we've got a range of different speakers from all different areas, and they'll introduce themselves individually as they go through. But I just wanted to say, again, thank you to Mapihi and Julia from Boffa Miskell, Dave and Georgina from Palmerston North City Council, Jack and Chris from Resilio, and Richard from Neville Design Studio. So because there's quite a bit to get through today, what I'm going to ask everyone is, if you have any questions, we're going to hold them off to a Q&A session right at the end. You'll see along the bottom of your Zoom that there is a Q&A little button that you can click. Throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions that you don't want to forget, put them in the Q&A, and then when we come to the end of it, we will go through them all and answer them. So just if you can, remember to try and put them in the Q&A area and not the chat area, that would be great. So yeah, to kick things off, we'll start with Mapihi.
Right, there we are. Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Mapihi Martin Paul tōku ingoa. Kia ora everybody, my name is Mapihi. Just a bit of a quick introduction to myself. I whakapapa to Ngāi Tahu, particularly Ngāi Te Hiki through my mum, and my father I affiliate to Te Arawa Ngāti Wikiao. Yeah, so I joined Boffa Miskell, the Ōtautahi Christchurch office in 2017, and I was the first graduate advisor Māori that they had ever employed. We had a wider Te Hīhiri discipline established already, but that included a lot of senior strategic advisors whose backgrounds were very, very different. I was the first to be employed with a design background in particular. So I was employed after graduating my BLA at Lincoln in 2017, and I'm now coming into my 5th year at Boffa Miskell. So I currently hold a title of Kaipake Te Hīhiri Strategic Advisor Māori, and that's a very broad job title. So today I'm going to just dig into it a little bit more about what that means. Yeah, so what is my role as a Kaipake Te Hīhiri Strategic Advisor Māori include? So I split my time as a consultant across these 3 key areas. So obviously, given my background in design, I was very quickly seconded to the Matapopuri Charitable Trust when I joined Boffa Miskell. So I joined there in January 2017, and I was seconded on to Matapopuri from April of that same year. So I worked there for 4 years as a landscape architect. For those of you who don't know who Matapopuri are, they are a iwi mandated design firm here in Ōtautahi. So they are mandated by the Ngāi Tuahuriri Runanga, and when SERA, the Christchurch Earthquake Recovery Authority, I think it's called, dissolved many years ago, they were one of the entities that were formed out of that kind of entity dissolving. So basically their entity was established to work on all of the anchor projects initially, from a mana whenua point of view, but that quickly changed into a lot of public and private projects outside of those anchor projects. I was lucky enough to take on a role as a junior landscape architect right when the anchor projects were sort of first kicking off. So I got to be involved in a lot of incredible projects that included really large scale projects like the Convention Centre was one of my latest ones, Cathedral Square, the new library, Margaret Mahi Playground, and it came right down to residential projects as well, like the one that's pictured there on the slide to the left. That is the Karamu subdivision in Yoldhurst, and so that's owned by Ngāi Tahu Property. So the role that I had was very kind of limited to playing a landscape architect that applied a cultural lens to all of the projects. And apart from being seconded outside to that role externally, I do a little bit of work in-house at Boffa Miskell as a designer, and again that is very limited to kind of projects that either affect Māori or are in places of significance to Māori, where I kind of bring the best of my creative kind of mind, and also my ability to see things through a bit of a different lens than other people at the design table. More recently, my work has transitioned into the freshwater resource management space. So working with Boffa Miskell ecologists, I now lead a lot of cultural health monitoring programs particularly across the South Island, but it has started transitioning into the North Island. So what that means is like when City Council or Regional Council undertake really concentrated restoration projects, like constructed wetlands, riparian vegetation, that kind of thing, a lot of it requires monitoring of things like water quality, fish habitats, that kind of thing. So I undertake that alongside mana whenua. And so what we do is that just really allows for cultural values to be monitored over time to see if the restoration efforts that City Council or Regional Council are undertaking are, I guess, restoring those landscapes into places that would have functioned like they did traditionally for Māori. So it measures things like are the fish species really abundant? Are the species that are present ones that may have been gathered really abundantly in the past by mana whenua? What's the water quality like? Is it a place that mana whenua would feel revitalized, or do they feel connected to this place because the water is clean? Or as you can see in that picture in the middle there, the water's really dirty. So what do those kind of environmental indicators mean to mana whenua and how they would use these freshwater environments? And lastly, engagement is a really critical component to my role. So over the years, I've worked really closely with iwi, hapu, runanga across the country basically, but especially here in the South Island as I whakapapa to Ngāi Tahu, who obviously hold the territory of about 80% of the South Island. So that I work on a really wide range of projects for mana whenua. So whether it's, explicitly things like design or ecology, or whether it's planning related matters, it can be, a wide range of things. But basically what I do is I act as the conduit between the client and the mana whenua to make sure that whatever outcome that they are trying to seek as a collective is really reflective of mana whenua, their values and their histories and their stories. And so sometimes that can be in really tangible ways, like if you use the picture on the left as an example, some of that structural artwork there and like the paving patterns on the ground, they're very tangible outcomes that can be brought to life through that engagement process. And other times it is actually just about the way that that engagement process is run. So obviously, through my experience, I've learned that engaging with Māori requires a very special kind of style. So yeah, because I myself am Māori, I can relate to the mana whenua groups really easily. We have communication styles that are very different sometimes. We like to be very hands-on. So I play the conduit between the client and those groups on any type of project that either affects Māori or is in a place of true significance. So because of that multidisciplinary nature to my project, I obviously get to experience a lot of different landscapes across the country, and that's definitely my favourite part of my role that I hold at Boffa Miskell. For example, there on the left is a picture of the source of the Arohura River on Te Taipōtani, the West Coast, where I got to spend the week with mana whenua. We got helicoptered up to the source of the Arohura River. That's a picture there, Whakarewa Lake Browning, where we undertook cultural health monitoring assessments from the top of the catchment to the very bottom, so from the source to the sea, also known as Kia Te Kitai. That middle picture there is at Dawson Falls. It's called Te Rere o Kapuni, So I work with the Department of Conservation and the local mana whenua group, where they are restoring their lodge. So it's like a hotel, basically on, hotel's probably not the right word, motel on the side of Mount Taranaki. So what we are doing is the hotel is being, the ownership is being handed over to the iwi to operate. And so they want to revamp the hotel and I guess reinstate their identity and their place and the importance of the maunga, the mountain itself, but in a way that, you know, is really respective of the stories that the landscape has. So that waterfall there was known to be really, really cleansing for spiritual purposes. So it's about using some of those indicators and clues from the environment that is really valued by mana whenua and taking that and transforming it into the built form, so their motel, and then again in the landscape as well. And of course, very close to my heart is Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere, because I whakapapa to Taumatu, which is on the edge of the lake. So I've done a lot of work over the years on this particular lake. It's the most filthiest lake in the country. So all the restoration work, sorry, that has gone on. I have been lucky enough to spend time with mana whenua and to really just build my knowledge about how this lake used to be, and where it once kind of overtook the landscape. It was a lot more natural. It inundated a lot further than what it does currently. So that's a place that's special to my heart. And yeah, I'm really, really lucky to spend time in environments like this, because I personally believe that there's nothing better than really getting to know a landscape intimately. So, you know, whether it's chucking on a pair of waders and spending a week in the river like I did on Te Taipotini, as hard as that was physically, it was just really, really humbling to spend that direct contact with mana whenua and get to learn what they value about their landscapes. I get to hear from them the places that they get to call home, how they've experienced them, what they used to look like, how they used to function, so that I can take that inspiration forward with me to develop the outcomes so that these places are protected and they evoke the kind of spirit that mana whenua really value. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's the role that I have at Boffa Miskell. That's very broad, but it's incredible to spend time in landscapes that are as beautiful as this, and give a voice to my people and to the landscapes and the stories that they've held for generations, and so that they are highlighted for the generations that come after me. So kia ora. I'll be around for the Q&A at the end, but I'll pass back to Megan.
Thanks, Mapihi. So next up we have Julia from Boffa Miskell, who's going to be talking to you about the wonderful world of landscape planning.
So hi everyone. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so briefly outlining the world of landscape planning, including addressing sort of some misconceptions about this sort of field of landscape architecture. I'll briefly talk about what landscape planning is, or design planning, and have a few project examples to share. It's mostly just a bunch of pretty pictures, but that's what we're all here for. So we were asked to briefly sort of introduce ourselves. So who am I? My name's Julia Wick. I am a principal landscape architect at Boffa Miskell. Boffa Miskell is a multidisciplinary ecology, landscape and planning practice based throughout Aotearoa. We have about 6 or 7 offices around the country. I have a background in criminology in the UK and retrained as a landscape architect very intelligently, I might add, when I moved to New Zealand on my OE. I specialise now in the area that is sometimes referred to as landscape planning. And my previous roles prior to Boffa were as a design planner at Isthmus and principal landscape architect at the Auckland Design Office, which is in Auckland Council. I'm geekily involved in Tuapita Ora or NZILA activities, and I'm also a member of the Resource Management Law Association and are currently on their national board for that. So yeah, landscape planning. what is it? So landscape planning often goes by other terms in our industry. We have called it in the past things like design planning, it gets called visual assessment, it gets called all manner of things. No matter what term is given to it, fundamentally, we are landscape architects. We work at a range of scales at national, regional, district and site levels. We typically deal with what I can only describe as the big picture landscapes, or with projects that are kind of at their early stages of their development. So at the resource consent stage or at that early conceptualization stage. We do a lot with spatial planning, visioning, and I do a lot of optioneering in these landscapes. There's kind of a bit of a common misconception that landscape planning is just this kind of boring report writing, effects assessment type thing that you sit and talk to lawyers and talk to planners and deal with this sort of statutory body. It's got a bit of an uncool rep, unfortunately, but it's, you know, it is not that in my experience. It's all about design and about critical thinking and about this kind of multi-layered approach to our landscapes in Aotearoa, and about how all this is integral to the outcome of these designs. So as landscape architects or landscape planners, we work across a real diverse variety of projects. I sometimes even struggle to name all the areas we work in, it's that diverse. One way I've found it really easy to do is to split it between sort of area-based work that we work on and proposal-based. That's kind of the two breakdowns I use. So when it comes to area-based planning or area-based projects, these are things that we kind of look at on a regional and district scale. So we do a lot of regional and district assessments where we could work across, you know, a whole region of Aotearoa, so Southland or the West Coast or Wellington, you know, these huge areas where we basically look to the landscapes and look to sort of break down these areas that build up these landscapes. So an example that we've done at Boffa Miskell is the Southland Marahikou regional landscape study. So this was led by Yvonne in our Queenstown office. And basically it's about taking and researching huge areas of the landscape. As you can see here on the right, it's these, you know, it's a whole area of Southland, and it's about basically looking at the topography and the geomorphology and the vegetation that make up these landscapes and trying to characterize them. We then go on to kind of pinpoint outstanding landscapes, outstanding features, and map these, and they have a real like knock-on effect on projects and on actual, you know, our landscapes of New Zealand. Another type of project we work on is also natural character studies. So these are sort of, once again, at that regional and district scale, but they're more sort of scientific based is a good way of describing them. It looks at basically the condition of our coastal environment, our marine areas, and involves a lot of work with ecologists, planners, people from NZILA, DOC, etc. And you basically end up doing a similar thing to what the landscape study is, and you end up mapping these areas within this sort of coastal environments that are outstanding or need to be protected or have elevated status for a certain reason. Recently, we've been getting into more and more kind of this area around seascape assessment, which is similar in a way, once again, to the landscape and the natural character studies, but it's more focused on, you know, the sea itself and the fact that land doesn't stop when it hits the water, you know, the whenua continues underneath it. So therefore we have to find a way of identifying which of these special areas of the seascape themselves. So we've recently been doing a project in the Waikato region. So basically you fly around in a helicopter and you look at all these beautiful, amazing landscapes and seascapes and pinpoint them. And this helps inform where people can locate things like jetties or mussel farms or do aquaculture studies. So it is kind of really dealing with that stuff at the really big scale. Here's just a cute snap of a seal, because we can't really do a presentation about the coast without a seal in there, we feel. Another example of the kind of work that landscape planners get involved with at this regional scale is the example that we have in Auckland, which I don't know if many of you are familiar with, but basically Auckland is these overlays of what they call volcanic view shafts. So these are view shafts that are basically identified, and they are there to protect views from the public realm through to the Auckland Maunga. They were identified back in the 80s, and they're kind of sacrosanct for development. Like, you cannot build into these view shafts under the Auckland Plan. They are, you know, they're the key prime element. And, you know, it's an old study that identified these in the 80s, but they are really, really important to the urban fabric and the makeup of Auckland, because these maunga kind of stand out as these key landscape attributes amongst the city, and they are really the defining features. And without, you know, a landscape planner, these things wouldn't be mapped and wouldn't be called upon. I mean, this is an example here of where they're called often the $1 million view shafts, because, you know, they're fundamental in shaping Auckland, and one of them prevents development in the central city of Auckland to a certain height to protect the views of Mount Eden. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing where these studies can go and the impact they can have on the urban form. And in this case, the Mangawhau walkway that Isthmus designed, you know, everything about that, because of the identification of this maunga and the ONF features and the design, everything had to be thought through in terms of how this boardwalk worked around the tihi. And basically, you know, they had to consider it from all these far view shafts further afield to basically figure out what and how it can be designed. So, I mean, they have a real knock-on effect. And this is just here me sort of listing, once again, more areas that we work in this kind of regional scale. We find we're moving a lot more into the areas of climate change and coastal inundation, adaptation and spatial planning. We find that we're often having to inform, you know, where things are located and do assessments at this sort of regional scale as well. The other flip side to what we also do is kind of what I call proposal-based assessments, and these are often where we get involved in visual aspects or in landscape and visual aspects. We get involved in a lot of green infrastructure developments, so wind turbines, green hydrogen plants, solar farms, and we undertake landscape and visual assessments to determine if this is the right location for this type of activity, and also if, you know, the visual effects of this activity would be appropriate or the like, you know. And we have to look at a lot of scientific data in terms of flicker and light and reflection in these projects. We get involved in really kind of large scale landscape management. This is an example up north of Auckland at Taraiti, this was just a coastal landscape, and through landscape planning and landscape architecture, it was created into this, you know, world-leading golf course, but it was done so sensitively with this underlying aspect of ecology and landscape and form that basically informed it. And John Goodwin in our office, who worked on this, you know, he works on it from that regional scale all the way through to the design and detail of it in terms of where these bunkers are and the dune sculpting and everything. Like, they are really, really complex projects. We've been involved in things like Porter's ski area, so looking at new resorts on the ski side. We get involved a lot in urban regeneration projects, particularly in Auckland. So this is looking at new towers and the urban form of Auckland and doing visual assessments for towers or buildings that may be over height or buildings that maybe aren't in the right location as compared to the, you know, the planning framework that it's identified. And we also do, you know, smaller things, like we do signage assessment, lighting assessments. We've done a fair bit of work on electronic billboards of all things. You know, it's seen that landscape architects have this understanding of where these elements need to be located and, you know, the impacts that these have on the urban realm and the stuff like that. So, I mean, once again, it's another sort of exhaustive list of all the stuff we get involved with, everything from motorways through to bridges, through to electricity transmission, organic view shafts. We do a lot of residential development in kind of areas of higher outstanding natural landscapes, and a lot of subdivision and brownfield and greenfield. One of the key aspects that really we have to work very closely with as being landscape planners is the working with our supporting team. And so at Boffa Miskell, we have them in the called tech services. You know, this is an extremely skilled team who specialize in collecting, analyzing, communication, planning design outcomes, and using sort of visual media and collaboration tools. So we've got examples where we have to use GIS to do kind of this, what's in this case, which is like a visibility review. And we also undertake visual simulations. This was just for a boat shed in Herne Bay, where, you know, we need to identify what the new boat shed would look like, and we undertake a visual assessment based on that. So, I mean, I've touched briefly on what a landscape architect does in the world of landscape planning. It involves design integration and thinking and working within a framework of legislation and within the RMA. Projects are varied and endless, but they are all pretty amazing, and they work, you know, all the way from that site-wide scale and region and district-wide scale all the way through to the detail. We're involved with a lot of stakeholder engagement and liaison throughout the process, and we often have to kind of collaborate and work with a lot of different specialists, from ecologists all the way through to kind of biosecurity through to legal and planners. Another aspect we tend to get involved with is a lot of expert witness services. So we do environment court, board of inquiry, council hearings, where you kind of, it's quite high pressure environment. You read and review evidence and provide evidence, and you often get cross-examined on your position. In short, it's a pretty amazing job though. I absolutely love it. I love that I have started to specialize in this area. It's an incredible part of landscape architecture, and I feel very fortunate to work amongst it. As you can see from the right of the image, we have this little thing going with the landscape planners in Boffa Miskell, which is #BetterWorkStories. I think it's stolen from the NZ Police website, but basically, you know, so much of our time is spent in choppers on boats doing these regional assessments that the photo spam is pretty terrible. There's still a lot of seals. But yeah, thank you for listening. I'll pass it back to Megan, and I'm available at the Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Julia. Next up, we've got Dave and Georgina from Palmerston North City Council, just to talk to you guys about working in the public sector and the council world.
Kia ora tātou. My name is Dave Charnley. I'm the Senior Urban Designer, Palmerston North City Council. Okay, and with me today is my colleague Georgina Dean. We're both employed by the Palmerston North City Council, and our role really is to work with people like Julia and Mapihi. We are really employed on behalf of the community to ensure that outcomes are being achieved for our city, but also if you're working in the territorial authority elsewhere around New Zealand under the same type of context, and guided by the Local Government Act to democratically engage and make decisions between communities and elected members, and our role is to help deliver those outcomes on ground. So we might as well start with introducing ourselves. As I said, my name is Dave Charnley. I'm the Senior Urban Designer. I sit in the Planning and Strategy team here at Palmerston North City. My role is relatively diverse. I cut across many aspects of council, and my background is obviously landscape architecture. I'm a registered member of the Institute, and currently I'm the chair of the Hawke's Bay Manawatu branch. My background prior to coming to local government 5 years ago is private practice. So I've got some good experience of sitting on both sides of the fence, and for various reasons I made the choice to come over to local government, or what many call the dark side. But it was more not only about professional reasons, but also personal reasons. I'd just like to hand over now to my colleague, George.
Kia ora, I'm George. I am one of the urban designers for council as well. I work in the strategic planning team also, similar to Dave. And my background is landscape architecture. And before local government, I was also working in the public sector over in Australia. And now I'm back in NZ down in Papaioia, which is really cool.
Okay, so our role, we are based in the planning and strategy team, but a lot of our work is working alongside our infrastructure teams to deliver funded programs on the ground. We also work with our customer team, which is the regulatory side of council. So we perform duties around design review and I guess the administration of the district plan and the Resource Management Act. But we also, we actively all the time working across many different types of communities and interest groups, and including working with private developers in the city. So we get to experience I guess, all aspects. We're fortunate that our city council here is of a size that we're not so, I guess, compartmentalised, and it requires our skills to be sort of drawn upon by many. We currently have probably 600 staff, so that probably may give you an idea of we're a pretty sort of medium-sized territorial authority. So I guess for us, it is about our role is trying to create a better city of Palmerston North. We have the ability to set the future direction of the city, so we're involved in writing our plans and strategies through our strategic sort of performance, and that strategic direction is set by our councillors who the organisation is answerable to, I guess, as representatives of the community. We get to really, I guess, marry both urban and sort of landscape outcomes together quite often. It's about creating great human habitat for our residents and visitors to be able to exist and function within, but also acknowledging what that means to integrating landscapes and systems and biodiversity and so forth. We get to do a lot of collaborative work and co-creation with many different groups, and that's really quite an exciting sort of area to operate in. And I think it's a really exciting time for local government across New Zealand to move away from government-centred delivery of services and outcomes to being very more people-centred. And that requires the structure of organisations and local government to rethink how they pull together their teams. So multidisciplinary approach to work, which is often an approach that's been carried out many years by private practice, that's now starting to form the shape of local government inside our work. It's about engaging and enabling. We get to do top-down, high-level strategic work, but we also get to work on the ground and do a whole lot of bottom-up placemaking, working with communities and letting communities sort of lead out some of those outcomes. And ultimately, our core roles, both George's and I's, is to champion good design outcomes.
So I guess working with local government means that you get to work with a whole lot of different other government organisations. So we work quite closely with Kāinga Ora and sort of supporting their housing and also dock, NZTA, so transport. There's a whole variety of people that we sort of engage with continually to make sure that we're championing that good design.
Yeah, and obviously with local or the way that government's structured, obviously there's central government, so many of those agencies on the screen that George has just talked about, and regional councils as well. So our one in our region is Horizons Regional Council, one of the largest regional councils across New Zealand. And that's just part of the multidisciplinary working is working up the government channel as much as our role at local government to sort of ensure that we're working with our communities.
So what guides us? So I guess from being a student as a landscape architect, I didn't really understand sort of where local government sort of sat and what sort of acts come into place. Obviously, Te Tiriti o Waitangi is one of the major ones that we sort of make sure everything that we're doing within the land is sort of speaking back to that, but also all of the projects that we work on for council is also talking back to those, and working with iwi and making sure that, you know, that the stories are getting reflected in sort of what we're doing. There's also the Local Government Act and the Local Electoral Act, so that's sort of where our councillors sort of get voted in, and sort of they have to act towards that Local Electoral Act. And then we've got the Public Works Act and the RMA, which talks to our district plan, the Reserves Act and the Land Transport Act, and also the Buildings Act. So there's quite a few acts that we sort of have to understand and get our head around to make sure that we're producing the right sort of outcome for our city.
And I guess for us, we are led by the strategic direction that our councillors through community consultation set and we help shape. So to the left, we have a number of strategic documents that we must give effect to. This is what we call our long-term plan. This is where we sort of set out our aspirations as a city. what those sort of programs look like, how we're going to fund them, and then the councillors go through the process of consulting and deciding upon where that funding goes. So these are the types of documents that people like George and I are always having to, I guess, champion with projects to make sure that we're hitting our strategic outcomes up the channel, as much as seeing the tangible, I guess, built outcomes happen in the community as well. To the right is, I guess, a diagram of our vision and goals for Palmy City. So in the middle in the green is our vision: small city benefits, big city ambition. We want to be a big city. We're in this a rate of growth where we're moving from the sort of the large town to the regional city. We're wanting to grow up a wee bit, and I guess that sort of is reflected in that vision, but retain those benefits of being regional New Zealand. Our goals are what drives us as an organisation, what we're sort of answerable to our elected members, and then further out in the concentric circle, our strategies, and then the plans that give effect to actions on the ground. So at the core of, I guess, working in local government, especially is engaging with community is key. I couldn't say it any simpler, really. We are continuously engaging on the ground with members of the public on a range of projects and programs. We are engaging with various groups and interest groups across the city. That, I guess, the image to the right, down in the right hand corner, is some work that George was doing with our youth of the city and engaging them in city play, and really trying to target that sort of age sector that we often don't get heavy engagement from. To the left, we are in a partnership with Rangatane, mana whenua here in Palmerston North, and we're moving into spaces of around the city where we're now in sort of co-governance around that. So it's working and aligning and partnering with iwi. To the top right hand corner is our elected members. They are our board of directors, I guess, if you were to think of it in business terms. And they're the people who we take expert advice up to in the chamber, and they make decisions based on, I guess, the information they receive from both us and also from the community and others who are submitting into processes. And to the left up at the top is really, it's reflective of the engagement of working right up the channel into central government and with those central government agencies. So this is the opening of a social housing project here in the city, where we're working alongside not only our community, our elected members, iwi, but also with the central government agencies who provided some financial support, and this was opened by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
So one of the sort of main landscape projects that sort of we've been working on for quite a while is Palmy used to sort of have their back to the city, and so our river framework is to turn our river back to sort of a central hub essentially, and make it a bigger park. So we have events where we celebrate Rangatane and sort of their iwi is part of their sort of design and well, not design, but their cultural elements is that fire is something that's really important to them. So to celebrate that, we have our spring kohanga, where we burn a lot of our stock, a lot of the wood that gets stuck into the in the river. And then a recent project that's just opened is the Eels Platform down at the bottom, and that's a partnership with Rangatane, where we worked to bring back the eels back into our river. And then we do things like glow paths and creating that connection, sort of so that the movable and walkability is forefront.
Yeah, so this is all work that is really falling out and being delivered under our Manawatu River framework. So we've got high level frameworks that we work on and develop that gives us sort of coordinated and integrated change over a long period of time, and allows us to get our ducks in a row around sort of programs and funding and engagement with communities. These are some other outcomes that we've been able to achieve along our awa. We've now got a commuter cycleway that connects the city out through into Massey and Linton, our army camp. We are really trying to, I guess, work on that aspect of small city benefits by being able to test and try out new things along our river as well. So things like nature play and a slightly higher risk play is one of those focuses. And then it probably comes back to those other sort of outcomes of how we integrate new built change into sort of natural spaces. So this cycleway going through areas of important bush that we have very little of in the city. And looking forward to the future, to the right-hand corner there is some work we're just kicked off with Rangatane under a co-governance approach around looking at Tamatua Pautua, which is a site of significance to Rangatane and a major par site right in the city. And so that's an exciting piece of work that we're sort of moving into the future. So watch this space. The other, I guess, side of the frameworks that George and I are really responsible for, not only developing, but also ensuring the overview and the implementation of, is our city centre framework. So I guess one thing to know with Palmerston North as a small regional city, we're growing at a rate of only probably say 1,000 people a year. We are growing. And part of our strategic risk to Palmerston North is our reputation for being a wee bit ho-hum and the quality of our urban spaces. So the city centre framework is about delivering on coordinated design outcomes and planning for that. So, you know, we get to be involved in civic space redevelopment, such as our arena. We get to look at streetscape design, working with our infrastructure team, and also we're able to work in that real sort of, I guess, agile way too around sort of placemaking and sort of lighter, faster, cheaper approaches to public realm change. Yeah, and often this is working alongside with our consultants from the Boffa Miskells or the Isthmus groups, who are really, they're employed to sort of work for us as the client. So we get to work with the private sector landscape architects and urban designers as much as our own sort of internal teams.
I guess a couple of the projects that we've been sort of just pushing out recently has been the Innovating Streets projects with NZTA. So that was a bottom-up tactical urbanism to bring people into our city centre and to slow people down, but also a reflection of Te Maraeohene, which is in our square, and making sure that there's that bicultural element pushed through into our city centre. A couple of other things that we've been working on is we have a lot of placemaking events. So street prints, the Big Cat, we had quite a few graffiti artists that came into our city centre and basically got to make the most of the free walls that we have. And yeah, we also do parklets. So having that conversation about, you know, do we need these car parks and how else can we utilise them to sort of make it more people friendly, comfort levels are sort of met, and also gives the opportunity for our cafes and stuff to really activate their space. And
you know, Palm is a really car-centric city, so these are great challenges that we're having to work through. That it's common challenges for many cities around New Zealand and the world, but in particular Palmy, you know, trying to get people out of their cars to move in different ways. So it's a great challenge to be continually working on. I guess another aspect of our work is we get to look at growth in growth areas for the city. We get to work at the city level. So to the left is our city spatial plan. So we get to think spatially at the city level. What are we trying to achieve that aligns to our 10-year long-term plan? Where is that change going to occur? And that helps sort of guide councillors and other stakeholders who come in looking to invest in the city as well. below that, we're currently working through, I guess, the future growth areas of Palmerston North. These are probably more your future greenfield growth areas. Intensification is obviously part of our work that we do especially under the policy statements around urban development. So we're currently working with our other colleagues in our team, our planners and our GIS analysts and our transport, senior transport planning team to look at these growth areas. The one to the left bottom is looking at probably about 30 years of our growth. It's currently about 840 hectares. It has some challenges around flooding and liquefaction. You can sort of see where the green water sort of areas through the structure plan exist to try and sort of integrate both living outcomes for new dwellings, but also managing our stormwater and our natural systems as well. So that's really about trying to get some certainty and direction to developers when they're looking to add more to our housing stock and where it will occur, but also how do we get coordinated about delivering on the infrastructural requirements that we're responsible with enabling this type of growth to happen. Another one is up on the other side of our river, where the topography changes quite drastically from flat through to sort of rolling hill. So this is a structure plan that's about getting coordinated connectivity to historical development that perhaps hasn't been delivered well, but also using the promontory sort of topography to deliver housing but also maintain those sort of green belt and connected systems as well. So, we get to be involved in a good range of different ways of looking and delivering on city outcomes.
One of our projects that we do is, or sort of our core role is to make sure that we're championing for good design. And so we have a Delivering Change Fund, which sort of gives us the opportunity to push developments further for good quality outcomes. And we hold workshops where we sort of play around with bricks, with timber blocks, and to see how much yield, how many houses we can get, or what sort of the outdoor areas are going to look like, where the shading is going to be. So it sort of gives us the opportunity to come up with alternative ways to sort of expand developers' minds as to how they can actually use their site. Yeah,
that's right. And it's about sort of trying to get those developments kicked off in the right way, that there's support there from council. We're applying, I guess, the district plan lens to that sort of live workshopping, so that the developer has a bit more certainty about the navigation of that process. But also it's about education. It's about, I guess, teaching at the same time about what is good design, what is good urbanism. And so those private developers too get a lot out of it too. So it's a tool that works really well for us. It's quite agile. It's quite exciting to be in those environments. And it takes a while for some of these to end up on the ground, but we are able to sort of shape what those end outcomes do look like by going through this process as well. And this is an example of that type of work. This is actually about shaping our own council's thinking. This is currently an empty reserve that sits on the corner of quite a desirable space in the city. And the council are currently going through consultation around removing the reserve status on this piece of land and potentially moving towards stepping into either partnership or delivering on a housing outcome, which we desperately need to address. So our role, my role in this sort of process, is to help, I guess, vision what an outcome can start to look like, and that can really lead a conversation in a different way by doing that.
Another big part of our role is design review. So that's working with our regulatory team and going through the process of resource consent. So the way that we sort of roll that out is to genuinely have a pre-application meeting with the applicants. So whoever's planning on doing developments, we sort of sit down with them and go through how our district plan works, what we're requiring of them, and ways that we can sort of work together to make sure that the quality design is uplifted, and also making sure that we're getting the numbers that we need for housing at the moment, which is forefront of everyone's minds. Yeah, so design reviews are a key element to what we do.
And lastly, part of our role too is to, I guess, be the people who are trying to improve the conversation with our community around good design. So we run a program, Creative Cities Conversations. It's really been drawn and inspired by the Auckland Conversations program, where we bring in external thought leaders, and we're really sort of trying to build a critical civic debate. So George and I host those once every 2 months in the city as well. So that's a really great chance to be sort of free and frank and talk about good urbanism and educate and build that dialogue with our community. So that's the exciting part of working in local government. There's lots of opportunity. Now's a great time. There's lots of government agencies who are looking for skill sets of landscape architects. So I think there's a real bright future of stepping over into the dark side, as we say, and working in a space that you've got that civic and civil hat on, and you're representing the community to shape great outcomes.
Great, thanks Dave and Georgina. I feel like I need to just plan a trip to Palmerston North now and have a look at it all. Next up, we've got Chris and Jack from Resilio Studio, who will be talking you through their sustainable design practice area that they work in. So over to you guys.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Ko Jack toko ingoa, e te whānau o wānanga o landscape architecture Aotearoa, nei ka mihi, nei ka mihi. We appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with everyone today. My name's Jack, and I'm joining you today with Chris Davidson. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Kia ora, Chris Davidson. How are you? From Resilio Studio.
So Chris and I are coming today to speak with you guys about, I guess, Resilio Studio, the sustainable multidisciplinary design studio that we're both part of, our roles and the type of work we undertake, being involved in that practice, and to share some of the projects, I guess, where we look to take some of our design, sustainable kind of design thinking and philosophy, and how that sort of plays out in the real world. So I'm just going to speak initially to the journey that's kind of led us to set up Resilio Studio, Resilio Studio's kind of ethos or kaupapa, and then following that, Chris is going to pick it up and speak to some of our project examples. So this slide here, just a quick slide that just sort of lets you know where we are in the world. We're a design practice based in Tamaki Makaurau. Our address is 21 Scanlon Street in Grey Lynn. Feel free to drop in if anyone's ever passing by. So if you can just jump to the next slide, Chris. This is a picture of us as a design studio. So as you can see, we're not a massive design practice. We're also not a small one, but thought I'd just include this. It's kind of nice to put faces to the name. This is me here, and this is Chris Davidson over here. So a little bit about Resilio Studio. As I'm sure is the case with many of you, what kind of steered me in the direction of training and pursuing a career in landscape architecture has its kind of roots in my connection with the environment, a fascination with the processes and patterns of nature or landscapes, and a desire to kind of help facilitate the improvement to the world and systems that we hold centered to life and culture within Aotearoa. For me, this perspective is kind of growing increasingly relevant as the challenges that face kind of human societies become more and more complex. I guess you've got, you know, issues like water quality, climate change, COVID-19, the list kind of goes on. But through my career, I kind of found that the most rewarding projects for me were ones that sought to kind of work with sustainable outcomes, ecological principles, community initiatives, regenerative design outcomes. And based on this experience, I co-developed a bit of a vision to set up Resilio, which is kind of the vision is for a multidisciplinary design firm guided by primarily an ethos or a kaupapa of regenerative design, rather than the delivery of landscape projects of a particular type or scale. So Resilio takes a whole systems approach to design and seeks to integrate regenerative design, co-design, and social innovation processes to projects of varying types, scale, and complexity. So we're not so much driven by a type of landscape architectural work, but we're a little bit more kind of concerned, I guess, with how we do that work and what the kind of regenerative outcomes are. So at its core, this approach for us is concerned with solving practical problems by providing function and utility, giving form and meaning to actions, objects, environments, and the conversations that produce them, and providing a vision, and a direction toward a sustainable future and a regenerative tamaki makaurau and Aotearoa. So we hold tight that design has the power to transform and bring about kind of positive change, that everybody is capable of contributing to the design process, and that almost anything can be designed. We believe that our role as designers is to use our passion and skills to feed and support individual and collective initiatives to bring about transformational changes necessary to build a resilient culture and bioregion. So Chris, if you can just go to the next slide here. So just quickly, this is kind of our philosophy and practice page, if you like, and this just kind of highlights some of, I guess, the tools or ideas that we use to try and ensure that our ethos becomes embedded in our projects. So we are a social business, and so by that we frame that as we're kind of an issues-driven and solutions-focused design practice that seeks to bring about positive social or cultural change through the work that we do. We really believe in the power of design. We believe that kind of design frameworks and design thinking afford a lens for which we can view complex challenges from multiple perspectives. Many of the challenging, as I said earlier, we're kind of facing these number of sort of increasingly complex challenges in the field that we work in: water quality, biodiversity, etc. And these really complex challenges require kind of creative problem solving and require us to think differently about these problems and think more about causes rather than effects. And we believe that kind of design is a really, really good tool, and in particular kind of landscape architecture is a really, really good tool to be able to kind of frame things in that way and look at things from different perspectives. Regenerative design, so that's a kind of big term within our office. So we kind of believe that doing less harm is no longer kind of good enough, and we must kind of leave environments better than the way that we kind of found them. We kind of believe design is changing. So within our office, we kind of refer to the kind of star architect or the starchitect or the star landscape architect, and that kind of concept has kind of faded. And design in the world of the 21st century is one of collaboration and inclusiveness. And through truly kind of a collaborative design process, we believe we achieve more kind of fit for purpose outcomes that fit better with the kind of communities that we are designing spaces for and with. Bioregional and place-based design, we place the health and the land of the people who live in those areas the center of our design process. Te ao Māori with Te ao Pākehā, so we're invested in design practices which integrate local mātauranga Māori and honour the te tiriti or waitangi, and we believe that designers have a responsibility to be social and the social cultural context we work in. Apologies. And lastly, kind of co-design. Design professionals and non-design experts alike are involved throughout the design processes that we work on often. So kind of bringing together, design professionals like landscape architects and members of community or other kind of community groups all into the room to kind of design processes and projects together, we find really produces really rich outcomes. So that gives you guys a kind of really quick overview of Resilio Studio and how we kind of endeavour to operate as a practice. And then hopefully, so Chris is going to speak through some of our project examples next, and you might be able to see kind of the way in which we take all of that stuff and start to kind of fold it into real world projects.
Thanks, Jack. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects we've got currently, and I think that'll hopefully will describe a bit more about what Jack was thinking and how what we're working on. So that's the first project's the Pulmonary Regeneration strategy, and it's an example of a green infrastructure and social strategy that seeks to regenerate the well-being of the awa and the catchment and its people. So this slide is the urban Hīhiri, and it kind of demonstrates the whole catchment of Pulmonary. And the strategy takes a catchment-wide view of the Pulmonary stream, which runs from the top Totara Park all the way through Marahikou city centre and all the way out to Manukauhawa. And so there's many initiatives contained within the strategy, just like this, the Hīhiri strategy. And I guess within that there's also the mountain to sea path following the river. That's the aspiration. And so the next slide. So this is really about there's 15 strategic initiatives that combine nature, people, and place. And I guess this diagram just illustrates the connection between nature, you know, the environment with people and place. I guess they don't exist on their own. And I guess within an urban stream and a complicated catchment like this, there's only one way to regenerate, and it's bringing, you know, having a whole systems approach and taking all these things into account. And that just shows some of those links between everything, all those strategies. So it's not as simple as focusing on the environmental side to improve the water quality of the river. It's, you need to engage with people and there's social issues, business and industry. So this is just a diagram of the lower catchment, trying to put some of those initiatives in practice. And I guess, like, you know, working on this project as a landscape architect, you know, it's really great to see landscape processes making their way into shaping urban environments. And this is a really unique project, and it's exciting to be involved in as a landscape architect. And it takes a holistic approach to a unique urban environment and a complicated one. And it you know, describes how natural systems work with nature and people. You know, it's a living document and strategy, and it'll evolve over time, over the next decade and more. And we're trying to see reciprocal relationships emerge in that strategy. So that's Pulmonary. So we've got a similar type of project. This is Glen Innes in Auckland again, and that's showing the whole catchment of the area. And we've worked on 3 projects in this area. We've got the Glen Innes to Tamaki shared path out in Point England Reserve there, and that's a shared footpath, better access to the Tamaki estuary, and one day that will actually link up all the way through up to Tamaki Drive and to the city centre. So that's the plan in the future, and that those projects are starting to happen. And there's also Taniwha Reserve that's under construction right here, and Eastview Reserve, which is in the design phase. So Eastview Reserve, part of Eastview Reserve and in the design phase is the public engagement, and that's this is a slide just showing the park itself. And Glen Innes College were involved in the open day, and they came down, told us what they'd like to see, what their aspirations were for the reserve. The wider community is really diverse: Pakeha, Māori, Pacifica, Asian, and yeah, I guess this project also has a nature playground, and we're working with Harco Brown to bring in some Marahikou elements and nature play. And I guess the public engagement as a designer, working with communities and having face-to-face, you know, conversations with people, just makes it much more meaningful, and it's much more makes the project really rich and rewarding. So because we're designing for these people, really. So Taniwha Reserve, another project that's actually in construction at the moment, and this is this Eastview Reserve just up the road, opposite Line Road. And the main thing about this project's got a wetland, and the Oamaru Creek is part of cleaning up the water. So the wetland tries to filter and clean Oamaru Creek. in some way. So, and this is also riparian vegetation, and we've got access through, and that's one of the main things for this project. So, you know, this is a recent photo of how it looks on the ground, and this is the wetland. So it's a big muddy hole at the moment, but this I guess this is great to see. I mean, from personally working on this project, we're looking at a catchment-wide scale and then following the works down to detailed level, and we see it's a great, seeing a big difference, creating new revegetation strategies, improving biodiversity in the catchment, and looking at detail and design and focus. Sorry, in real detail. So, you know, also in this area, you know, we've been involved in multiple projects, and it's great to kind of follow those projects to the ground and develop relationships with Mana Whenua, communities, and thinking in the future how to facilitate and bring life into the project in the area through engagement, and how to engage in a meaningful way. So that's been a great process. The third project I wanted to show you is Kaipake. So this is Kaipake Reserve, and it's got this is the red is the water catchment again, for so the Kaipake River. So that's the water catchment, and you know, this is quite an interesting a co-governance client setup. So the client Te Puare o Kaipake Ki Kaipara was an entity created through a settlement claim, and it's a joint ownership between Ngāti Whātua o Kaipara and Auckland Council, and they oversee Kaipake Reserve. So the project, this is Parake Springs, that some of you might know, nearby, and this is the Kaipake River. And the brief for this project was to restore links between Kaipake River and the Parake settlement, mitigate flooding. It's quite a low-lying area, so lots of flooding in this area, improve biodiversity, create a new play space, and there's a campground as well. So I guess with the setup of the project and the co-governance setup, working with Ngāti Whātua o Kaipara, that was done in a way that provided tangata whenua worldview into the project in a meaningful way. So it allowed collaboration of Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā to create, you know, a unique, I guess, to drive the project, and it's I guess it's a it drove the design. There's lots of design drivers to come out of that, and I guess next slide, zooming into a bit more detail. This is example of the playground, play structures, and this came out of a rigorous co-design process with Ngāti Whātua o Kaipara, and we worked with Harko Brown, who's the traditional Māori Marahikou. He designed the playgrounds. So, and Bernard Makare, he's also talking about Māori worldviews and integrating that into the design. So what you see here is a traditional Māori a swing called a moari, and I guess these came from traditional stories of the place, and how Māori used to use the land and have fun in this place. So I guess this concept joins together modern play equipment with referencing the histories of the area, and you know, the great things for this project, Ngāti Whātua o Kaipara took a strong position and development in collaboration with Auckland Council, and you know, it's one of our core part of our design practice, bringing together Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā worldviews in a meaningful way. And like you can see, the design drivers informed the playground and the reserve, and through underlying concepts and spatial arrangements and colours and textures, for example. So I think we've got a bit of time. Jack, did you want to add anything to those projects?
No, I think that was good, Chris. That was good.
Cool. I'll stop sharing and let us know if you've got any questions later on. Cheers.
Thanks, Chris and Jack. So really exciting projects there. So next up, we've got Richard from Neville Design Studio, who runs his own company. So he's going to be talking you through his experience of working within the residential design realm, and yeah, take it away, Richard.
So kia ora everyone, I'm Richard Neville and I've got my own practice called Neville Design Studio, as Megan mentioned. I started my own thing about 2 years ago, and I studied at Unitec and at Victoria University, 2 years at each. I graduated in 2010, and from there travelled overseas for a couple of years and then returned to work for Natural Habitats. And my work at Natural Habitats was at a range of scales. It was a mixture of residential design and some commercial projects as well. So from this sort of scale through to subdivisions and green roofs and an eco park, for example, as well. I was at Natural Habitats for about 3.5 years, and then I had 2 weeks in New York, and really like this photo where there's this beautiful moment where the skyscrapers of Manhattan meet the greenery of Central Park, and enjoyed a couple of weeks there walking around, including visiting the High Line, which is of course a famous linear park in New York, and designed by a great team, including James Corner and Pete Ordoff, who's a world-renowned planting designer. From Natural Habitats, I worked for Xanthi White Design for 2 years, and then, as I said, about 2 years ago, started my own thing. So the focus of my work is at the other end of the scale. It's mainly residential design with some commercial projects in the mix also. Part of the ethos of my work is how can we build greater connections between each other and our environment and plants as well. My projects range from sort of inner city things to residential designs like this one, which is rural. It's actually at South Head, just north of Auckland. And it includes a pool, an internal courtyard, an orchard, and a number of different spaces. This is another shot from the same project, and I've been fortunate to hear Bernard Traynor speak a few times. He's the founder of Ground Studio in the States, and one of the things he speaks to is arriving on site with humility. And for me, that means listening to the land, being present, and taking design cues from the landscape. This particular project is, the building consent for this project has just been approved. So here's an example of some of the drawings that I do, and this drawing really describes the way the pool sits into the land, and again, taking cues from the site, using the levels from the site and responding to things in a sympathetic way to the land. Another project I thought I would share with you is this one it's a commercial one. This is for West Harbour School. The project started with a workshop with the students. We walked around together, and they shared what was important to them personally, what was important to them in terms of West Harbour School. And they did some drawing and some writing. We shared those things together. From there, the design research continued. This particular one involved quite a lot of writing and just trying to distill those ideas down to develop a story for the design. From there, the principles of the workshop with the students and the design research was translated onto the land and how these things can be rationalized, and the concept design for this. So the principle of this design is that 26 kauri trees walk from the front entrance to the school office, and they're representative of the school mission statement to stand tall, proud, and confident. Woven together, the kauri trees are woven together by this pathway which meanders through the land, and that's symbolic of the local Manatawhau stream. There's 3 long curved benches which represent the school logo, which are blue, black, and gold. So the idea behind this design is really how can we thread the kaupapa of the school into the land. Here's a before shot of the project. It was completed in about May this year. One of the concept sketches, you can see the kauri trees which are walking towards the front entrance of the school, and a couple of the benches there. The project under construction, so part of what I do is see projects through from start to finish, and that includes overseeing the construction on site. And this is the project at practical completion just after planting. Another before shot from a different angle. And again, when the project was completed, this mural is by a local artist called Erica Pierce. So another project that I thought I would share is a residential one. This is in Browns Bay in Auckland. The focus of this design was to transform a site which was almost all lawn and therefore low biodiversity into a extensive garden which is almost all plants. This design features about 90 different plant species and almost 2,000 plants. So there's various zones in the design and they respond to the site conditions of each zone. Here's an image of one of the details. This fence is about providing some translucency of the view so you can look through to the garden beyond, and a rhythm to the module of the fence that was used. Here's the planting design, which is fairly chaotic, although there's a rhythm and principles at play as to how this comes about. It starts with the larger specimens and features and emergent plants, and then from there works its way down and is playing with texture, form, rhythm, habit, color, all those sorts of things. So another tool that I use in planting design is plant pellets. This garden had about 10 different plant pellets. The plant pellets overlap from zone to zone, and this particular one is for the edible garden, which was on the top left of the previous drawing. A secret garden, which includes a number of different plant species, mainly native, and a flowering meadow, which is this really vibrant, colourful area of the design, which erupts in colour in the spring and in the summer. Here's a shot of the design finish. This project was completed sort of mid last year, and originally this part of the site was just a grassy slope. So as I mentioned, a key part of my work is this connection between people and the land, and in this instance the client's kids enjoying the garden and tearing around. That's Marcus and Ada, who love exploring the garden and the various elements and things. An image of plant textures and colour and playing with those things. This is a perennial garden which sits adjacent to the edible garden and is about inviting ecology and bees and life, and helping with the pollination of the veggies. And again, connection between people and plants. The last project that I thought I would share is a beer garden. It's in central Auckland. It's at Galbraith Ale House. So the nature of this project was an in-between space between the pub and a water reservoir. And the brief was a walled English beer garden, and from there the conversation developed, and the key challenge was providing a link between a pub, a library, which was the original use of this building. It was Grafton Public Library, and the context of the site. And that landed in each of those and their ability to tell a story. So the context, which is Mount Eden, is linked with recycled basalt curbstones. This is one of the concept sketches, and you see the basalt curbstones here. The plants are a mix of flowering perennials and natives and some edibles, which are used in the Galbraith's kitchen. And then there's a number of antiques which are placed carefully into the garden to add a further layer to the story. This is the project a month or two after completion. It was completed at the end of last year, ready for the summer. The recycled curbstones, which are a key component to this design, and the way the space is articulated. They stitch together the garden beds on each side and articulate the space, which was a slope and has now become 2 terraces. Again, establishing connections between people and design elements and our environment. Another shot which shows the terraces and the way that they sit into the gardens. There's almost no retaining in this design, and that was because there was a number of underground services, so we need to be careful there, and instead sloped gardens and these terraces is how the space has been articulated. Some more design details. This is Bombay bluestone from South Auckland, and as much as possible I try and use materials and things which are from the area or from New Zealand rather than overseas. Sometimes tricky, but it's a goal. An even finer detail, which is a rock and some pizza thyme, artemisia and lavender. And a little bit of background into what happens between the concept design stage and the construction drawings. This is the landscape plan for the beer garden. One of the section drawings for that design also. And the garden in the evening. So these festoon lights which provide a warmth to the space and also give the space this feeling of having a ceiling and sort of this greater feeling of intimacy. So I thought I'd finish with what I enjoy in the type of work that I do, which is of course design. My days are really varied. They vary from site meetings, concept design, develop design, resource and building consents, conversations with clients and contractors, engineers, other consultants, and at the end of the project, plant layout on site, which is an aspect that I really enjoy. These shots are from the Browns Bay project and the plant layout with that. Really diverse garden, as I mentioned before. The planting plan, which became continually harder to read over the process of the plant layout, which was 2 days. And I sort of like the poetry and the colours merging like the plants will in time as they grow. Fussing over details and plant layout and that sort of thing is another part of my work that I enjoy. And lastly, I thought I'd share a few images that really show another part of my work that I enjoy a lot, and that's arriving to a new site. And this is the beer garden at Galbraith's Alehouse again, and seeing a project through from start to finish. So this is a before shot of that space, just a liminal space really between the pub and the reservoir, which is the wall in the background. The construction phase, which I oversee as well, and the finished garden. Cool, kia ora everyone, thanks for your time.
So yeah, thanks everyone for presenting and I guess offering insight into the work that you all do. Mapihi, you mentioned that you were the first graduate to be hired in that area that you work in. Do you see it being kind of a area that's just going to continue to grow And I guess if someone doesn't have the connections to mana whenua, like is that, you know, how do they go about kind of working in that area if they've got an interest in it, or can they, you know, incorporate that into their work?
Yeah. I guess to answer the question about, so obviously I have the added advantage of being Māori, and I, you know, whakapapa to the areas that I work in. So, you know, I know a lot of the people on a personal level that, you know, I acknowledge is a pretty special thing. But, you know, like just during the conversations and the presentations had today, it's clear that, you know, a lot of us in the landscape architecture discipline, or you know, urban design, all that kind of thing, we have been working on a lot of projects that, and you know, where we're closely involved with Māori. So although I have that advantage and that direct connection, it's just a matter of that makes it easy for me to make contact, I suppose. But you know, all of us that have presented today, you know, 9 out of 10 of us have had a project that is directly for iwi, so it's not impossible. I suppose it just makes it easier. In terms of, you know, the direction that I ended up going, I just knew from a personal level that I felt I could achieve a lot for my people if I broadened the scope beyond just design, and got really involved in the freshwater space. But that was lucky that I had a mentor above me that was really experienced in that space, who's since gone on to be elected at regional council. So yeah, I guess it just comes down to personal passion, and where you see you can, you know, do the best for people. Yeah.
We have question from Joshua, first off asking, is anyone hiring? So if you are, get in touch with Joshua. And he also asks, imagine working at a range of workplaces helps when setting up your own workplace. So for those that have set up their own, I guess, work, did you find it helped by working somewhere first, or yeah, to get some experience in that area? I don't know if Richard, you might want
to that, Jack?
Yeah, for sure. I guess the answer in short, probably, Joshua, is yes. There's a degree of kind of experience that definitely plays into setting up your own workplace and setting up your own practice. I guess my story is, prior to setting up Resilio, I worked for a number of smaller landscape architectural outfits, and then I spent a reasonable amount of time working for Jazzmax. I think more than purely just kind of getting experience with being a landscape architect and then making a decision to set up your design practice, I think the thing is to have a well-rounded kind of exposure to landscape architectural projects to figure out what aspects of landscape architecture kind of drive you as a designer, because what becomes really important when you do start your own practice is understanding what is that kind of kaupapa or ethos that sits behind your practice, because that essentially kind of guides everything. So there's kind of two parts to that. One is getting the experience to understand how to be a landscape architect and engage in landscape architectural projects. The second part is to get a range of experience to figure out for you, what is it that kind of drives you and kind of gets you out of bed in the morning, if you like.
Yeah, I suppose, and to add to that as well, is the what I found working at a number of different firms in the past is it develops and builds on that business acumen side of things. So you learn a lot about kind of invoicing and the kind of the boring side of the business that you need to understand to be able to establish your own business. And there's also, I suppose, the flip side of client contacts and establishing a name for yourself, which I think probably does help.
Yeah, I would agree with, can you hear me? Yeah, I would agree with all of those things, and particularly what Jack said in terms of a range of experience and finding your place in landscape architecture. It's so varied, and I think today's been a really great illustration of that, from various aspects of the profession and scales and everything. Yeah, today's been a really nice summary. I've actually enjoyed it a lot.
Cool. Mapi, I've got another question for you from Flo that's just come through the chat. First off, she just says awesome presentations from everyone. She does have a question though, Mapi, around you that you mentioned a cultural health assessment. And she was wondering if you could explain a bit about what this is, as it's a new term.
Sure. Yeah, so the term cultural health assessment is, if you break down that title in itself, is basically an assessment of the state of the environment, I suppose. So often in, environment court hearings and things like that, you hear a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better word, Western science-based data. So, that can be numbers associated to water quality. It can be, it's obviously very specific, measurable data, right? Where a lot of the times cultural values are really hard to capture. Oh, sorry, apologies for the dog in the background. A lot of the time cultural values are really hard to measure and make tangible and be defendable in environment court, because they are holistic and they're very spiritual based. So what cultural health assessments do is it utilises a tool called the State of the Takiwā tool that Te Runanga o Ngā Tahu here in the South Island originally developed, and we've kind of progressed it a little bit further. So yeah, Runanga representatives basically go out to a project site. More often than not, it's based around freshwater catchments, so rivers, streams. In particular, one of the examples that I'm leading at the moment is a reconstructed wetland. So what it does is monitors the things like water quality. So it actually just quantifies how the constructed wetland is functioning from a cultural perspective. Yeah, that's a snapshot in about 30 seconds, but there's a lot of information out there.
Great, thanks for that. Doesn't seem to be any other questions. I have one more that I've just written down while you guys were both all presenting. Dave and Georgina, how important do you think it is that an LA feeds into those long-term plans for council?
Do you want to
Dave, do you want to? No, you go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I guess my answer to that in short is landscape architects or people with the skill set of landscape architects should be constantly at the table to I guess not only shape the future direction setting of a place in a space, but also to be there helping to deliver on the ground. We actually play quite a fine role between, a lot of strategic direction is written reports and sort of high level thinking, and the challenge is how do you actually turn that into outcomes on the ground for the people and the citizens to experience and interact with in their everyday lives. And like I pointed out in our presentation, it's the move from putting the person in the middle for governments to deliver services around, as opposed to the old way of where it was sort of very government in the middle and we were sort of the high tower of yes and no. So it's crucial. A lot of landscape architects are playing really valuable roles from both the private practice field and assisting us. And organisationally, council should be thinking about where do landscape architects sit in the organisation structure. I can't advocate strong enough to have landscape architects heavily embedded into local government.
I think just to add on that is landscape architects look at things very differently to, I guess, other experts in councils like engineers or so forth. So we've the ability to, I guess, tell a story that our city doesn't really get otherwise if they're not sort of at the table. So
yeah, and really there to challenge thinking and testing out what are the opportunities for new ways of doing things. And I think the key role of helping, especially for our city, bring, I guess, iwi and council better together about jointly delivering projects. I think I believe we play quite a key role in that at various levels.
Great. We just had a question come through from Brad who says, cheers guys, appreciate the time. Does your final year thesis work have a large part in how your professional career plays out? Fourth year studio. Everyone's shaking their head.
Yeah, no.
No,
I think
not
I did
really.
mine on some urban inner city SIPTED assessment thing, and now I don't really deal much with that anymore. But I mean, I learned a lot along the way.
I think that's the key.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's the journey of being prepared to have an open mindset about learning and finding where I guess your niche or your passion lies within the broad range of what our profession offers you. My journey has certainly been very diverse. You know, I did a lot of residential design for many years, as much as have worked in sort of, I guess, public space outcomes. But it's through that journey of who you work alongside, who you meet and connect with, and the influence that they have on you. I'd just be open-minded about where it takes you, and you'll find your space and place in the industry somewhere that really drives you to get up every day to make change.
Yeah, I think just to sort of toe-talk what Dave said a little bit, I think somewhere along the line at university, I had a piece of advice that was kind of to not sort of forego the years that you've got at university to really express that creativity and really push the boundaries and really kind of go there with something. Don't try and, I guess, lock yourself too much into, you know, some sort of angle that you think's kind of taking you down a particular career path at that point. I think really at university all the way through to fourth year, really hold that as an opportunity to just kind of go wild, go crazy, kind of really push the boundaries and go there with all sorts of wild thinking, because you'll have the opportunity to find yourself going down a career path. So yeah, I think just hold on to that opportunity at university for sure.
So there's a couple more coming through. On the topic of local government earlier, is there much opportunity as a landscape architect for involvement in central government as well?
Go, George.
Sure.
I would say yes. I think there's a lot of opportunity for landscape architects to have a seat at the table in local government, and I think that's something that is like hugely important in terms of what we do to sort of make sure that what is happening like nationally is sort of coming through, especially with the MBA, the new RMA natural built environment that's been proposed. That it's hugely important that sort of our industry is reflected in those spaces.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we're currently in the context of a central government that's driving the wellbeing framework, and that is really, it sits within the 4 pillars of design that we know as landscape architects. So there's massive opportunity there. There's, I guess, some relationships that George and I deal with every day, especially Kaingaora and their housing program through the country. We know that there's big opportunities opening in that area around housing and the role that landscape architects will play in the delivery of trying to deliver quality housing for people. Also waka kotahi and a lot of work around innovating streets. I guess the global streets are the design guidelines and trying to transition that into a New Zealand context. So there's a heap of space to sort of find a niche. And you know, I know others who are working for the Ministry of Environment and policy space or planning space. So yeah, definitely lots of opportunity. And I think with government, those opportunities will continue to sort of be there for us.
We've got one more question here. Do smaller practices have specific staff for research, or is this a position interns, grad students could do?
Well, not necessarily coming from a smaller practice. Boffa is probably not the smallest, but we tend to have examples in the past where we have used students, particularly in their 4th year, who provide a lot of input into our regional district studies. There's an example in Christchurch where one of our grads, she actually was still at university when she came to Boffa and joined us, and it was because of her 4th year research project, and she kind of went into this research position. So the opportunity is there. I think it's a matter of aligning the projects and having the scope to include a student. But it's definitely something Boffa do.
Yeah, and I think you know, it's good to come in, and I think if you are in that position, just really just try to be in, you know, just show your interest, or try to you know, be interested in all the projects, and just kind of be enthusiastic. And I think you know, just be inquisitive, and I think it's a good place to be to learn about what kind of projects we work on, and what we do. I think it's a good time to come in.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, what Chris is saying, I guess from a student or intern perspective, I guess the other aspect that is really useful from that perspective is kind of making yourself present to a number of firms or studios. Kind of helps to start a relationship and start a conversation. And so we've got a number of interns who are currently working with us at Resilio, and that's just really quite good, is to just kind of, you know, it might be 1 day a week, it might be 2 days a week, but it's the start of a conversation, it's the start of a relationship, understanding how Resilio operates as a studio, how they kind of start to work with us and embed themselves within our kind of work culture and work practice, and that kind of develops over, you know, the last year or two of their study. And yeah, it is a really good way to kind of get in there and get to know a practice and get to know a studio. So for sure.
It's similar to local government, as we try really hard to align with university students and massive planning students, or massive fine arts students, to sort of uplift them and make sure that they're a part of the city change as well. So we definitely look towards having, I guess, the younger generation pop through in terms of grads and interns as well.
Yeah, we offer opportunities for landscape architect students to come in and undertake an internship for a summer period during holidays. So yeah, we've had various landscape architects come through the organisation in the time I've been there, where they've worked for the infrastructure parks team for a summer, or they've been sitting in the planning team, just building, inquisitively building what the planning sort of context is around from a city perspective. So those opportunities are there, and it comes back to a bit like going to private practice, just about creating those connections and those opportunities inside those organisations that sit there, both in private space or public sector.
Great. I think that might be all the questions there. So yeah, just thanks again for all of you guys for taking time out to yeah, just share a bit of insight into the world that you work in. For those that have stuck with us through the chat today, we've got part B next week, which will look at the other half of the areas that you can go into as a landscape architect. And then the following week, we are looking at tips and tricks for portfolios and interviewing, which I'm sure a lot of you will be very interested about. So yeah, again, thanks very much for joining us today. Thanks for the panel, and thanks for those that have joined us to listen to these guys talk about their fabulous jobs.